Good afternoon, and it's a pleasure to join you today for this conference on global canola trade and to give a perspective from the Australian angle. I'm Nick Goddard from the Australian Oilseeds Federation, which is the peak industry body for all of the oilseeds that are grown in Australia. I'll run through a few slides today that will just give you an outline of some of the factors that are impacting the decision making on the trade flows for Australia for this coming harvest. I've sort of couched it in terms of what's certain and what's uncertain. And there are some things we know are uncertain, and some things that we know are certain. And that is certainly going to impact the trade, the intention to trade, the risk associated with it for this coming season. But first, we'll just have a look at how the Australian crop has gone. And I used this same slide last year when I gave this presentation, and some of you may remember this. But when we look over the last 20 years at how the Australian canola crop has developed, we see that it's more than doubled from around 2 million tonnes as an average back in the early 2000s, up to now where really if we don't get a 5 million tonne crop, we're disappointed. So the last couple of years have been well over 5 million, but we're sort of setting that now as the new minimum and or the safe minimum. But in fact, this year we'll come in at something like 5.4 million tonnes is the expectation. So again, that above that safe minimum. But yeah, the Australian canola crop has grown on the back of increased area, which you can see there in the blue bars, but also increased yield as more varieties have become better adapted to and bred to adapt better for the Australian conditions, and a rapid growth in the use of hybrid technology by the farmers. We just look at our export markets over the last few years, you'll see there that the European Union continues to dominate our export market with a little over half of the trade. And you see that Japan comes in as number two, and this has grown significantly over the last couple of years, particularly on the back of the Canadian drought when Japan was chasing additional canola. Then the UAE has been a strong and consistent buyer of Australian canola over many years. Pakistan and Bangladesh have both returned to the market after an absence of a number of years, and Mexico, a new market for Australia, again, initially on the back of the drought in Canada preventing supplies to that market, but then with the insatiable appetite over the last couple of years of the United States for biodiesel feedstock coming out of Canada, again, that's provided some consistent market opportunities for Australian canola into Mexico. If we look at the trade flows year by year over the last couple of years, you can see there the decline in the European Union as a market for Australian canola. And this has been a concerted effort by the Australian trade to diversify its market into areas such as Mexico and Bangladesh and Pakistan and grow the Japanese opportunity. You'll see, though, as we progress through the next few slides, that we'll see a bit of a reversal in the coming year with the European Union returning as a major destination for Australian canola in the coming season. And talking about the coming season, it's really a balance between the certainty and the uncertainty, as I flagged at the outset, what we know and what we don't know. And to paraphrase Donald Rumsfeld, it really is about the known knowns and the known unknowns. It's what we know, and it's what we know we don't know that's really going to shape the trade for the coming season. There are, of course, the unknown unknowns, which we just don't know, and we won't know until they happen. And so we can't really plan for those, but we certainly can manage our trade on the basis of what we know and what we know we don't know. So I'll just list some of these thoughts down. Some of the things that provide certainty, unfortunately, is the Middle East conflict. It looks like that's going to continue on for some time, certainly over the next 12 months in our shipping season. The Middle East conflict looks like it will continue and perhaps even escalate. And certainly the restrictions in the Red Sea will look like they will also continue. So trade routes will continue around the Cape of Good Hope, which of course for Australian shipments to Europe means a more costly voyage and a more time-consuming voyage. But we've managed it well over the last 12 months, and looks like we'll be continuing to do that over the coming year. Certainly over the next 12 months, we don't see a softening in the European Union demand for renewable fuels. Over the longer term, 5 and 10 years, yes, we do actually see a softening for demand for renewable feedstocks such as canola. But in the next 12 months, we don't see a softening there. And so that remains a sort of some certainty around that. What we also know is that we have a large carry-in from the last couple of years of very strong harvests. In fact, we have around a 2.2 million tonne carry-in, which will mean we'll have an exportable surplus of around 5.2 million tonnes that needs to find a home this coming season. And of course, the final certainty is that people must eat. So whatever else happens, we know that there's always ongoing demand for canola oil as a food. That will be the base of demand into perpetuity. But looking at some of the uncertain, the known unknowns on the other side, creating uncertainty in the market, I'll start from the bottom and I'll start with the Australian harvest. So we're about just a few weeks away from the start of harvest now in Australia. Things are looking pretty good. But we're, as they say, the opera's not over until the fat lady sings, and we've got a few more weeks to go yet of variable weather. But there is growing confidence with each day that we will get around 5.4 million tonnes for harvest. But still, it's not certain. Similarly, the Canadian harvest, still a bit of uncertainty around the final numbers there, somewhere between 18.5, 19.5 million tonnes. So again, a bit of uncertainty around that, but starting to firm up as each day goes by. From an Australian perspective, exporting to the European Union, the Union database on biofuels, or UDB as it's paraphrased, is certainly creating quite a degree of angst and concern among Australian exporters, as those that are involved in supplying the European Union would be familiar with the additional requirement to transact effectively through the UDB, and yet the platform is yet to be proven and tested, and there is great uncertainty around the ability of being able to execute effectively with European trade through the UDB at this point. It's still got teething troubles that we don't know about, so certainly a known unknown there. Similarly, the US elections coming up again provides quite a lot of unknown risks. If former President Trump is re-elected, we could expect to see a fairly major change in the United States biofuel policy at a national level, and that will impact trade flows significantly, particularly canola out of Canada into the United States is likely to have an impact there. So that is something that is creating uncertainty, not necessarily in the immediate next 6 months, but certainly 12 months and beyond, as policies change. Should former President Trump be re-elected, that would have an impact on canola trade flows from an Australian perspective. Similarly, Australia and China is also an unknown for us, in that currently Australia is not able to export to China because of concerns around phytosanitary and admix levels, or levels of trash. There is ongoing negotiations with the authorities in China to secure a pathway that will enable the resumption of trade, but there's nothing imminent that's going to appear there. But of course, these things can turn on a dime very quickly. We will have to wait and see, but there's nothing in the immediate short-term horizon that's known. It's certainly an unknown. Similarly, the situation between China and Canada is again creating uncertainty in the market. Should China impose the restrictions that they have flagged, then Canada has to find a significant home for another 5 odd million tonnes in the market, which again will significantly impact Australian destination markets, particularly Japan, and some of the Southeast Asian markets of Bangladesh and across into Pakistan. So some known unknowns there that are creating some additional risk for this coming season for Australia. However, notwithstanding all that, from what we know today and based on our known knowns, this is how we see the current forecast for this current coming harvest. We see a significant return to the European Union as a major destination market for Australian canola, taking over 3/4 of the exports. So something like 4 million tonnes potentially heading to Europe this coming season over the next 12 months. Japan, while we had extremely strong sales with Japan over the last couple of years, reaching over 1 million tonnes, we still expect Japan to be strong at around 12% of our export volume. Mexico remaining in the picture at around 3% of our exports, and the United Arab Emirates also around 3%. And then perhaps less than 100,000 tonnes to Pakistan, Bangladesh, and other markets, to give us a total exports of around 5.2 million tonnes for this coming season. So let's just have a look at this year's prospects and how the season is shaping for Australian canola. As I mentioned earlier, we're coming into harvest period. It's just a matter of weeks away, and in northern New South Wales and northern Western Australia, around the Geraldton zone, the start of harvest is probably more days than weeks away. If we look at how the season has panned out over the last 6 to 8 months, and this map is showing the rainfall deciles since start of the season, so 1st of April to the 31st of August. And you can see this area over here. This is northern New South Wales, the top part of this green circle. This is an area that either grows a lot of canola in a year or grows practically none. Very much dependent on soil moisture. And in the last 12 months, or over the last summer, it had a lot of good rain coming in from the tropics up here, and that enabled a strong canola crop to get underway for this year. So New South Wales, very strong. The southern part of this circle down here, a traditional strong canola growing area for New South Wales is actually been particularly dry this year. You can see there on a decile level, very much below average. Similarly in Victoria, this area over here, and then into South Australia, again, particularly dry this year. So expecting to see harvest volumes and yields particularly cut back in this area. Moving across to Western Australia, they've had a very mixed year. In fact, they started off extremely with great concern. So very dry, a lot of dry seeding going on, a lot of abandoned crops are then moved into wheat. But then mid-season, the season did change for Western Australia, and things are actually looking pretty good. Certainly down on past years, but actually a bit of a saviour has come through, and those growers that were able to sustain their canola crops through the early part of the season will do well this year. However, there's still risks on the horizon, despite the fact that we've only got a few weeks to run. This point, frosts, we've had some pretty severe frosts in the southern area of New South Wales, where the air has been very dry, the ground dry, and the crops struggling as they're moving from flowering into pod formation, just the time when you can't afford to have frosts. Been hit here, frosts still remain a risk in many of the growing areas. And of course, as Australian canola is harvested coming into summer, the risk of a hot, dry finish is always there, although the Bureau of Meteorology is not really projecting that at this point. So at best, could be looking for a fairly typical finish in this part of New South Wales and for much of Western Australia. So if we look at the tonnage forecast for this coming season, this harvest, this is the Australian Oilseeds Federation estimates. I won't run through each state. You can see the numbers there for yourself, but total production down potentially around 6% off prior year at 5.4 million tonnes. And for comparison, I've put some other estimates below there. So ABARES, which is the Australian Government Agricultural Statistician, looking at about 5.4 as well. The USDA is coming in at 5.5 for Australia, and Lockstock, which is a private consulting firm in Australia, again looking about 5.4. So running your eye through that, you see it's somewhere between 5.44 and 5.5 million tonnes for this coming harvest. But bear in mind, we have something like a 2.2 million carryover from last year. So that will leave us with an exportable surplus of around 5.2 million tonnes, which will need to find a home for this coming year. That's really all I had to say today. Thanks so much for your time. And I'm available if people do need to contact me, please reach out and do so. It's been a pleasure to be part of this presentation, this webinar today, and give the Australian perspective on the canola trade. And I wish you all very well for the rest of the sessions today, but particularly for those that are at the growing end of the value chain, a successful outcome. Thanks very much.